Sports, it lives in the world of not knowing. It's the uncertainty of the outcome, the unpredictability of the moment, the psychology of winning and losing. It's why we lean in when the clock gets tight. We love the hero's journey. Can the underdog win? Will there be another miracle on ice? Or will the GOAT cement their legacy with an overtime winner in Game 7? That's the exchange we're willing to give with professional sports. We'll give you our undivided attention, our loyalty. We'll wear your merchandise as if it's tribal wear, because you give us this emotional roller coaster. And what we get in return is the purest kind of drama, the kind that cannot be scripted. But over the last few years, that value exchange has been challenged by a new force.
This is a massive problem, and they kind of know about it, and nobody wants to talk about it.
Legal sports gambling, first supercharged by legislation, and then by technology. We put a casino in everybody's pocket.
And the new form of gambling is you're just pressing buttons.
And sports gambling has grown exponentially. $170 billion alone last year was bet on legal sports sites in the United States. When something gets that big, it becomes magnetic. It pulls in more bettors, but also attracts more determined, more nefarious actors who want a slice of the action.
Genuine surprise, I think, to most sports fans is the depth of corruption in sports.
And how? They take the uncertainty of sports and create a certainty. They fix the action.
They want the dopamine system in your body being turned on every few minutes.
Now, the old image of fixing is the big, loud crime. We're going to buy an entire outcome, like the infamous 1919 Black Sox scandal, where 8 players were accused of conspiring with gamblers to rig the World Series. And fixing still goes on, more than you know.
And we've got a problem among our athletes, our coaches, our sports officials, our team owners in terms of their addiction to gambling.
But there's also a new game that's being played, and it's called fixing a moment that most fans barely notice. But modern betting turns into a standalone market, a foul, a card, a first inning run, a missed free throw, an early substitution. In a world of live betting and prop bets, the game is being atomized into thousands of tiny wagers. And that makes spot fixing the perfect crime, because you can cash in without changing the headline. We're going to learn about what it means to fix a match in spot fixing. We're going to learn about how organized crime recruits, how it targets the vulnerable, how it turns the uncertainty of sport into the certainty of a bet. My guest today has made it his mission to pry into those cracks with courage and conviction, not from a safe distance, but going into the shadows to understand how this really works and who's profiting from it.
And my prophecy that one of the major American sports leagues is going to have an existential crisis in the next 5 years.
Dr. Declan Hill is one of the world's leading investigators of corruption in sport and the author of The Fix.
Being a professional athlete is a tough game. And that's even before you get to the level of sports.
This episode, I want him to answer 2 questions. First, is sport fixed? And if so, can it be fixed? And second, is sports gambling, as my guest has stated, the new opioid? And what does that mean for the collective psychology of a nation when we lose more than we win?
It is addictive. It's as addictive as tobacco or alcohol.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman. Thank you for listening to Chatter That Matters, presented by RBC. If you can, please subscribe to the podcast. And ratings and reviews, well, they're always welcome and they're always appreciated.
Declan Hill, welcome to Chatter That Matters.
Hey, thanks so much for having me. I'm really happy and honored to be here.
Is sport fixed more than most fans know? Is this an anomaly, or is this a reality in the way you present it in your book?
I love sport. The reason why I've risked my life, the reason why I've dedicated so much passion in my career is that I want to preserve sport. I want to make sport what it should be, which is a vehicle for the ideals and morals and values of our young people, that glorious uncertainty, that drama, those life lessons that we can take. And it's really under threat, and it's under threat by greed, by sheer unadulterated greed. Can that be fixed? Can we stop this? Yes, absolutely. There's some really simple stuff
open our minds to this concept, how the fixes move from final outcome to these moments that happen within the game.
Proposition bets are basically micro bets. And this is the plan of bookmakers, is they don't want you going to the horse races and betting on just who's going to win the race. And an hour later or 20 minutes later, there's another race and you bet on that. They want the dopamine system in your body being turned on every few minutes. So what they're doing is they're constructing an environment to keep you on that high, win or lose, keep you on the high. So there's a series of micro bets that go on. Who's going to win the next field goal? Is it the guy who's taking the next face off left-handed or right-handed? What's the number of all the players on this shift on a power play? Those kind of micro bets go on. And we're seeing more and more in Major League Baseball. We had a major scandal in the fall. In NBA, we had the Jonte Porter scandal with the Toronto Raptors. A minor player got embroiled with organized crime guys who said literally, we're going to come to Toronto and, quote, F you over if you don't pay your money. So start fixing for us, start working for us. There's a major problem in NCAA. There is a massive, massive problem. What we're seeing is we're seeing the corruption of these micro bets. And you're absolutely right. There is an endemic problem. But there's also just good old-fashioned match fixing of the results. And people are talking about that because the only way the sports leagues really sound the alarm is if the betting odds start to move. And that's like stock market insider trading. In a penny stock, in a low-valued stock, you can quickly see if there's insider trading going on because there's just very little money, very little liquidity on those big bets, on the big, who's going to win this game. It's really difficult to see in the odds movements. For example, you'll know from reading my book, I went inside a major Asian organized crime gang who fixes games at the World Cup of Soccer. And that's the biggest betting event in the world by leaps and bounds. Makes Super Bowl look like, a bush league. Every single one of those games in the World Cup, which we're having in America and Canada and Mexico this coming summer, there's at least $1 billion in every single game. Huge. You can't tell when it's that large what's happening just by looking at the betting market. You need inside intelligence. You need investigators looking at it.
So when you're talking about a micro bet and the sudden swing, it raises people's suspicion. Because why would so many people be betting on whether you're going to be a left-handed or right-handed face-off? But when it comes to the big game, it's impossible because there's so much cash flowing in. It's reality. Okay.
There's so much liquidity on those games. And what you do if you're a fixer, and I'm sorry to give advice to any would-be fixers who are listening to us, is you don't bet like they did with the Chicago White Sox in 1919. You don't bet for the favorite to lose, because then it's fairly obvious that there's something weird happening. You go to the underdogs and you say, guys, you're going to lose anyway. Why don't you lose with $50,000 in your pocket? And that's exactly what these NCAA alleged fixers did for years, because the market just wasn't picking up on that stuff. Getting the players to fix seemed relatively obvious. They were just reaching out to them on Facebook or Snapchat or whatever. And these guys were saying, hey, sure, we'll do it.
If I was a Hollywood scriptwriter, I'd say, now that I've got that fly inside my web, I'm in control of the fly. Did that happen, in fact, that once that commitment was made, they knew that they had somebody they could count on time and time again?
You take the reputation of somebody, you take them hostage. I'm a fixer and I fix some big major star. He's like, oh, I'll go to the cops. And I'll say, okay, well, I'll just tell the media you were working for me. What do I care? It's no big deal for me. For you, it's everything. So why would you go to the cops? I've got your reputation now. I own you. But there's also the fact many professional athletes, the gambling addiction is rife in our sports community now. Professional athletes are facing an epidemic of gambling addiction. And very, very few people are speaking about it.
How does that happen? Because is it organized crime is getting smarter? Is it algorithms? Like, what's making the web so enticing for these people to walk into? Or is it just, it was always there, but now the ease has just made it that much more apparent?
There's two issues that are going on. One is, let's take a step back and talk about what gambling actually is now. When I think about gambling, I'm afraid that I think old school terms. I think about driving to a horse race, going to a casino, taking my money out. It might be a small interaction, but it's a little human interaction with a teller, with a bookie, with a croupier. Even if I were to go illegal, I'd still need to have gone to a bar and met some guy, and he would see me, once every, month or so to settle up our score, whatever. But there's a human interaction. Much of that is old school. Much of that has gone out the window. And it's all on this. And for those of you who are listening, I'm now holding up my mobile phone. They're walking around with a casino in their pocket. And the new form of gambling is you're just pressing buttons. And it's called frictionless gambling. There's no human interaction. You're just tapping to get your dopamine constantly. It's as addictive as heroin. The second thing, everything that makes a professional or a top athlete good at what they do, drive to succeed, utter competitiveness, incredible focus on overturning odds that nobody thought you could do. It makes them fantastic athletes, and it makes them absolutely terrible gamblers. I know many among my professional contacts, professional gamblers, like guys that actually beat the bookmaker. And their personality is absolutely the opposite. They're ice cold. They're mathematical nerds. They're really driven to do their homework. And then you have a third factor, which is the sports leagues have just gone straight into dancing with the devil. They have all this official sponsorship, all this official advertisement. So you have these poor athletes running into arenas named after bookmakers. Every time they turn on a TV, they're inundated with ads from gambling companies. So you've got a clear conflict of interest between a sports league that is basically doing business with bookmakers. They often have official sponsors. So this is a massive problem. And they kind of know about it, and nobody wants to talk about it. And there's another prophecy that I would give, which is that one of the major American sports leagues is going to have an existential crisis in the next few years because of this issue.
You've got a doctorate from Oxford. You're Canadian born. You're one of the smartest guys in the world on this, yet you're willing to risk your life and go into the shadows. I mean, you've got to be a target. You've got to have a lot of people going, this is the last thing we want the world to know, is just how corrupt the world of sports is.
Yeah, and I find most of my pushback is actually from sports leagues and sports officials. Public, I mean, they're like, oh, yes, Professor Hill, come and speak to us. But in reality, they're like a meatpacking plant producing toxic sausages. They do not want to discuss. They don't want to kill anyone. They don't, they're not happy that it's going on. But much bigger to their issue is if the public knows how bad it is. What's happening now is the scandals are just becoming too big. The FBI is getting involved. The Department of Justice is getting involved. I mean, if you look at that Eastern District Court of Pennsylvania's criminal indictment of the NCAA alleged fixers, we're talking dozens of the top tier 1 universities. They allegedly had fixed and corrupted a number of DePaul basketball players. And DePaul and Georgetown were playing. The fix was, okay, guys, give us the first half. Like, just lose the first half below the spread. We're going to parlay that with another bet we have. We're going to make hundreds of thousands of bucks, and then you can play any way you want in the second half. So they do that. They're literally texting the fixers, and the fixers, alleged fixers, are saying, hey, this is a great job, fantastic, blah, blah, blah. Then those DePaul University guys who had played really badly deliberately in the first half just turn it on in the second half. And they bring the game to 1 point. You go home at the end of that game and you're like, this is amazing. Like, what was the halftime like in the DePaul dressing room? It must be amazing. It must have inspired the guys. It must have made. But what you were actually watching was pure theater.
You went inside an Asian fixing gang. You weren't a journalist looking from afar. You weren't using ChatGPT. I mean, you got under the ground. What did you see there in terms of level of sophistication? Like, paint the picture. How do they bring people in? They high five. I mean, what's happening within it that they're in fact a sport within the sport?
One, they are very intelligent. One of them used to work at MIT. So they understand the gambling market. They understand what's going on. Two, they're trustworthy in a way. They're honest criminals, which in that world is like gold dust. often, and this is the thing that is a genuine surprise, I think, to most sports fans, is the depth of corruption in sports. We think as fans, I certainly did when I began this work, that all athletes were well paid. And my mind automatically went to the top 1% of the 1%ers in athletics. And that's actually not how it works. So many of them are badly paid. 1 or 2 games, every World Cup, every FIFA World Cup are fixed. And the reason why that happens is so many of the teams at this big international sports tournament, the biggest in the world, don't pay the players. And most of those teams, they come from around the world, but most of the teams reliably are sub-Saharan Africa. So that's Cameroon, Ghana, Nigeria, Ivory Coast, Senegal, those type of teams. I'm not saying that each one of them fixes. I'm not saying that each one of the players fixes, but the corruption in African football is so endemic that any of our African listeners are going, yeah, finally somebody is saying it. Those teams, if they were run like Argentina, Germany, Italy, whatever, are capable of winning the World Cup, but they're betrayed frequently by corruption. They'll run onto the field at this big tournament. The team beside them is getting paid, and they're not. And the fixers have been working and building relationships for years with these players. Some of them were approached when they were in the under 17. They've got their coaches working for them. They really build an endemic system of trust. And it was the same thing with the alleged NCAA fixers. They worked for 2 or 3 years in Chinese basketball and NCAA Tier 1. Is when they say they're going to pay you $10,000 or $30,000 in cash for underperforming, they do. I had a meeting a couple of years ago with one of them. My question was, what's stopping you? And they're like, nothing. Just keep it simple. Everybody gets 20% of their cash back. We're not being greedy. We're just keeping it going.
You made a great comparison that those that have and those that have little. Does that also exist in professional sports where I see the star making 10, 15, $30 million a year? I'm going out to have the same dinner. I'm hanging around the same bus. I don't have that sense of cash flow. Is that part of the strategy of recruiting, or even the trainer or the coach that bring the people in that don't have the same sort of share of the riches?
Recruitment is never a problem for these games. I have many very good contacts in the tennis world, and tennis match fixing is an endemic problem. To be fair to tennis, to be fair to the officials that now run tennis, since the 2016 expose by the BBC and BuzzFeed, they've really taken a handle on this. But their essential problem in tennis is the top 50 male players and the top 20 female players make gazillions of money in terms of sponsorship and prize money. And then once you get out of those top 50, top 20 players, you quickly just descend into a desperate situation in terms of money. So if you're on the tour, if you're ranked, 200 or 300, you are struggling to make cash. And so quite often, players will sell games and they'll make more money selling the game than they will ever when they're winning. So I remember one of my contacts inside a tennis match fixing gang said, look, we were fixing dozens of games a day, and we had players phoning saying, we want to work with you.
What happens to the psychology of a player that, parents sacrificed everything. I made this my dream. I'm now in the top 100 in the world, but starving. So I'm going to start compromising my integrity for cash. Is that slingshot inside even more dramatic? Because it was this dream that I chased. I got close to the top, but now within it, survival depends on me surrendering everything that I believed in.
Being a professional athlete is a tough, tough game. And that's even before you get to the level of sports. First of all, to be top 100 at any sport in the world is incredibly competitive. You are looking at what you're eating. If you're going to bed 8 to 10 hours a day, you're constantly injured. You're making small sacrifices all the time. So, for example, one of the match fixing athletes that I talked to on the tennis circuit was fixing games where it didn't really matter for his points. He's due to play one of the majors in 2 weeks. He's got a torn hamstring. But at the beginning of the season, he signed contracts with a bunch of tournaments around the world to make sure that he keeps the points going, that he's still moving up the ranking. So here he is in a third-ranked tournament in San Luis Potosí in the middle of Argentina. His hamstring's injured. He knows he has to go to the major tournament in a couple of weeks. He flies to Argentina. He's got to pay that himself. He's in an opening round with a player who's, not bad. And he thinks, well, if I lose to this guy, bet against myself, I'll get more money from doing that than I can if I win. I get back on the plane. I get back to my home country. I can take care of my hamstring and I can be ready for the majors in a couple of weeks. Rationally, it makes sense. Morally, we don't like to think about it. That's a lower ranked tennis player. Let me drop 3 names that every single NBA basketball fan who's listening to us is just going, yeah, mate, you're right on that. Utah Jazz, Sacramento, and Washington. Tell me at this point in the NBA season, do you really think that they are trying? I think the players want to try. I look at the record of those 3 particular teams, like many other NBA basketball players. I'm like, they're tanking to win the draft, to win the draft lottery so they can, quote, rebuild. And that's not the players. That's an official decision that at some point someone has said, this is what we're going to try to do. So to me, that undercuts the entire integrity of the sports league. Oh, I might be wrong. Maybe those 3 teams are really trying their best and they're losing part of their season is all coincidence. But I find it difficult to believe that. And I know millions of NBA basketball fans are looking at that going, guys, you're just tanking. I would pose the question, what is the difference between tanking and fixing? And if you're on a tanking team, if you're an athlete or a coach or whatever, and you know your team's going to tank, why wouldn't you bet against yourself? That is the standard of integrity that the sports leagues have brought in. And so this is why I go back to my statement, my prophecy that one of the major American sports leagues is going to have an existential crisis in the next 5 years.
The athlete that gets embroiled in this, is this become as addicted to them as what sports and winning was in terms of the purity of the sport, saying, my game plan now is no longer just X, Y, Z. It's about making sure that the fix is paid.
There's a whole range of athletes and psychology of athletes. There are some athletes who would never fix whatever you throw in front of them. There are a few who are just criminals. And they're openly boast about that in that little circle. They're saying, I bought myself a condo, I bought myself a sports car, I got another condo, all from the results of my fixing. I would never be able to get that if I played honestly. There are other sports athletes who was a Japanese player in the Australian Soccer League. His mother no longer speaks to him. I think she's being harsh on the guy because he hadn't been paid for 6 months. His wife had just had a baby. And somebody said, I'll give you $10,000 if you take a yellow card. $10,000 in cash. Where would you stand on that one? You've got a baby, you haven't been paid in 6 months. Note the international perspective of that particular fix. He's a Japanese player playing in Australia. Colombian fellow is making a couple $100,000 on the Asian gambling market. It's an international, global phenomenon of sports match fixing now.
We come back, Declan and I talk about the realities of a society getting addicted to gambling and what it can lead to, including suicide. And then he offers some advice to parents, advice that truly matters.
Hi, it's Tony Chapman, and a big thank you to RBC for sponsoring Chatter That Matters. Speaking of matters, I have a question for you. You're checking on your family, your health, even your car. When was the last time you did a check-in on your finances? Well, RBC Check-in is a virtual experience with no obligation. I got answers to all of my money questions, big and small, and I now have a plan for my future. Book a check-in at rbc.com/check-in.
Why don't they just do this? It's so simple. Why, this isn't complicated to protect 90% of sport 90% of the time. Why have sports leagues and sports officials allowed this problem?
My guest today is Declan Hill. He's earned his PhD at Oxford, world-renowned, highly respected investigative journalist. And like many of us, he loves sports in its purest form, but he was astonished to find out how much of it is fixed. The other side of the coin toss is what sports gambling is doing to individual and our collective psychology. When something fun becomes addictive, when a bit of fun money lost suddenly becomes my house money's lost. I've been anti-sports gambling since it arrived. And if it's legal where you live, I encourage you to go to your government sites and see the effort they're making to encourage people to gamble. Cash incentives, lessons, even stories of people who have become famous as sports gamblers. And this is all happening at a time when people feel they're already pushed to their back feet. They're struggling with the unaffordability of life, the uncertainty of the job market. And they start thinking maybe that sports gambling is their Hail Mary to get them out of their current situation. And Declan, you've gone even further. You've called sports gambling the new opiate.
It is addictive. It's as addictive as tobacco or alcohol. And you don't allow tobacco or alcohol to be sold in primary schools. And what we've allowed in Ontario is unregulated sports gambling. They pretend that, oh, there's some regulation. Oh, yes, we're going to make changes. We're going to stop gambling advertisements before 9 o'clock. But really, it's just unregulated. The bookmakers came in and they bought out many of the regulators. They said, come and work for us. So many of the guys quit their jobs in the government of Ontario, quote, regulation things, and just started working for the bookmakers for 2 or 3 times their money. They talk about self-regulating market, which is makes as much sense as an NFL football game to be we're going to get rid of the referees. We're just going to allow everybody to run around and ref themselves. It just doesn't work. We need proper regulation. There are products out there in the gambling market, very much like Joe Camel in the tobacco days back in the 80s and 90s, where for our younger viewers and listeners, the tobacco industry, before they got properly regulated, was designing icons, was designing narratives in their advertisement that were dog whistles to 14-year-olds and 12-year-old boys and girls, quite frankly, that were trying to hook them early to bring them in. The same thing is happening with sports gambling. The UK Gambling Council, which has many problems, many issues, but it's light years ahead of what we've got in Canada, estimates that there's well over 55,000 teenage pathological gamblers. The bookmakers agree with that figure. So just think about that. That is the largest stadium in Ontario, packed with 15, 16-year-olds who aren't just trying gambling, are pathologically addicted. They ruin their brain structure at that early age. And then most of them are going to be gamblers for the rest of their lives. Let's look at what it's done to the rest of society. There's a fantastic paper out of California by academic colleagues looking at the rate of foreclosures, house foreclosures, and car repossession. And it's up to 50% higher in states that have got legalized sports gambling. The general population are losing their homes, are losing their cars, are being hit. Because this kind of conversation, Tony, between you and me and our listeners and our viewers is simply not happening.
Legalized sports gambling. Present me a positive side to it.
Look, just regulate it. Let's put some just basic regulation in there. In the same way that alcohol is regulated. People still want to buy booze. They'll still want to have a drink with their buddies, whatever. Okay, fair enough. You go to a bar. It's X distance from a high school. You have to show ID, et cetera, et cetera. You got some basic regulations and people can do addictive behaviors. And there'll be a certain cost in society. But we've decided as a society, we've decided as a community, we're willing to put up with that because we want this necessary freedom. What is one regulation that we could do that is so breathtakingly easy, it's going to stun people? We could make match fixing in Canada illegal. At this moment, it's not illegal. It's not criminal. And I've had conversations with match fixers who have actually immigrated to Canada so that they can go around fixing games. Take half an hour, 15 minutes, change the criminal code, add one paragraph saying, if you change a part or the entirety of a sports event to benefit from sports gambling, you're going to jail. There's lots of other regulation that gets into the technicalities of sports gambling. But just that shows you how bad the regulation or the lack of regulation is in the Canadian market.
There's so many areas that we could explore. A quick one for me that when I read your book and saw some of your interviews, how much is sports gambling and money laundering? Is there an intersection between the two?
It's so intertwined. It's unbelievable. Look, again, I'm hoping this isn't a class for criminals here, but if you want to money launder, sports gambling is the easiest thing in the world. Just bet both sides of the sport event. So let's say I've taken a bunch of cash in my cocaine empire in Vaughan or wherever the mob is working these days. I go to a legal bookmaker in Ontario, I go to a legal bookmaker in Quebec, and I bet the Canadiens, the Habs and the Leafs are going to play a game. And so in Quebec, I bet on the Leafs, and in Toronto, I bet on the Canadiens. Somebody's going to win. I'm going to lose one bet, but I'm going to win the other one. At worst, I'll have to pay an offshoot of 10, 15%. But the cash comes in, and I say to the tax guys, I've just won this bet. You just washed your cash. It's so easy.
I want to get very granular because I have to believe a lot of parents out listening to this are becoming deeply concerned about their child. Is there anything you've observed that parents should be thinking about to, one, raise awareness that this isn't just an isolated event? This could be a path towards addiction. And two, is there anything they should be doing to hopefully create some kind of moat around it before they become the next Phil Mickelson, where the next bet seems to be all I care about?
Teens, males, females, women have a slightly more proclivity to becoming addicted to casinos. Young boys, men have much more, at this moment, it's changing, but at this moment, are much more inclined to sports gambling addiction. It's built into a number of the esports that they're playing, the concept of a loot box. And frankly, there's a whole series of people I would describe as dodgy celebrities who are now advertising sports gambling, including some current NHL hockey players. Of course, a young boy or a young teenager is going to be looking at his heroes, and his heroes are saying, hey, it's okay if you gamble on sports. It's fine. It's great. They're walking into addiction. Just imagine alcohol and tobacco companies were allowed to do those same kind of things. You're not allowed to use tobacco. You're not allowed to link tobacco and sports anymore. There's a massive break. You just can't do that. You can't use a celebrity athlete to push a particular type of alcohol or a particular type of marijuana. Sports gambling now is the same thing. So I beg parents, please have a conversation. Your teenagers are smart. And once they understand that it's addictive, they can start making decisions for themselves.
My concern is you'll hear back, Mom and Dad, I know what I'm doing. I'm only spending a few bucks. I earned the money. I pack bags at the local grocery store. It's just fun money. How does a parent counter that? Because the parent that worries that joint leads to heroin and often are very dramatic about how easy that gateway is. You have to have a certain personality. But I think with sports gambling, the gateway seems to be easier for me to go from one-off experimentation to, as you said, releasing this constant sense of dopamine in my brain, because it's like I'm playing a video game.
There are two facts that are useful for parents to know. One is the concept of bankrupt or ban. And that is how the algorithms works now. There is no way any sports gambler who's successful will be able to beat the bookmaker. The algorithm turns them down and eventually bans them. This comes from the best sports bettors in the world. They formed an organization protesting the algorithms on, quote, legal sports. If we beat you guys, you don't encourage us to keep betting with you. You gradually turn the amount that we can bet from 1,000 down to 100, down to 10, and then you shut our accounts down. Conversely, if we're losing, you open that volume up. So the more you lose, the more welcome you are. The more you become a VIP, the more you get these little special bonus offers or whatever. There's no way that anyone is going to win now in a North American legal sports book. Two, I beg, I urge, I implore parents who, before they have this conversation, go to the site gamblingwithlives.org, gamblingwithlives.org. And I pray in all seriousness, with complete sincerity, that none of our listeners ever have to join that group. because that is a group of parents in the UK whose children have committed suicide because of gambling addiction. And on that site, they have a number of resources to have exactly these kind of honest conversations with their children. And it breaks your heart. The problem with gambling addiction is, unlike many of the other addictions that we've been speaking about this morning, 1 in 5 addicts ideates, thinks about suicide with gambling addiction. It is a desperately dangerous form of addiction. Let's put aside sports integrity. Let's put aside everything else that we've spoken about. If there are parents listening, go to that site, gamblingwithlives.org, and begin to have these conversations. Or simply show your children, here's a website, just take a look at it, so they understand the dangers of what they're getting into.
When I look at our society today, and we spend so much time typing and pushing things in the cloud, we're no longer the blacksmith fixing Steve's horse. We're no longer creating pottery. And we've lost that tactile element. Do you think that what social media has done, what sports gambling sites has done, is making people feel they still have purpose and pursuit, that there's an outcome, there's a win or a loss? My decisions matter versus most of the stuff I do nowadays just gets lost in the cloud. At the end of the day, somebody says, you have a good day's work. I guess so. As opposed to going, yeah, I shoot Johnny's horse and they don't have to put it down. Is that part of the psychology of social media and sports gambling that we prey on now, is that we do need purpose in life? And if so, as the future of unwork arise and there's more and more AI taking away our tasks, are we even more vulnerable as a society to create this fabricated sense of the hero's journey? I'm going after something. It's a win or lose, risk, reward, fight or flight. Is that not even feed more into our desire as humans to still feel like we're valuable?
To be remembered, that narrative, as you described, of the hero against the system, is the one that the bookmakers will promote and push. You know sports, you can make money. I strongly urge you to know that it's a completely false narrative in sports gambling. You're never going to be able to make money from them on that ban or bankrupt model that they have. Two, I'll share an anecdote with you. It's got an end sampling of about 2 or 3, but I was recently, as a professor, I had to go to a high school, and there was a bunch of parents there thinking about how to educate their children. And there were 2 prominent senior executives on these big AI and computer companies. They were absolutely adamant that they wanted no screen time for their children. And I'm watching this going, you know what you're peddling. You know the famous story about Mark Zuckerberg, where he sends all his kids, they have no screen time. The people that are manufacturing this world, they don't want it for their own children. So why should we have our own children doing this as well?
I could honestly speak to you all day. You have passion, your pursuit. And I always end with my 3 takeaways. I loved what you said very early on. I love sport and I want to preserve it. And I think that is a noble cause because I love sport. And I'm sickened and saddened. The uncertainty of the outcome, the unscripted drama that I'm watching, in fact, could be very scripted. And what you really opened my eyes to, it's not just this sort of spot moments within the thing, but it's in fact taking advantage of people that already feel they're going to be losers and being rewarded for it. The second one is I love the way you use memes. I love words, and you talk about reputation hostage taking, frictionless gambling. And I'm not saying that you're claiming these as your words, but you have an incredible way to frame a situation and then allow us both sides. And I congratulate you for that, because most of the people that I've talked to or interview, whether it's my podcast or when I'm doing radio, I'm only going to stick in this lane because that's what I'm known for. And when you say, you know what, I don't blame that gambler who had just had a baby, has no income. I don't blame them for doing it. It just shows you that how vulnerable we are as a society to be taken hostage by people that want to prey on our insecurities, our uncertainties, and it's sometimes our need for validation. And the final thing is that I really appreciate is your courage, because it's easy to write about this. It's easy to have a Substack on it, but you've gone down these wells, you've looked around, you've talked to people. To me, when I read your book, when I listened to your interviews, we all have biases, but I think you keep your biases in check more than many, because you're open-minded enough to realize having different points of view allows us to get a better view on what really is going on. So for all of that and more, you've just been an absolutely delightful guest. You got my dopamines going and I didn't have to bet on it.
You put it brilliantly and eloquently.
Once again, a special thanks to RBC for supporting Chatter That Matters. It's Tony Chapman. Thanks for listening, and let's chat soon.